All right, so thank you all so much for coming to part 4 of our inquiry series. On this time, we're going to be focusing on assessments. So we've gone over what inquiries were, we've looked at questioning, we had a little bit of work time and review of how to really adapt and build kind of inquiries. And today we're looking at how you can use inquiries in the form of an assessment. So just a couple of items of business. I just want you to check, make sure the volume on your computer is okay and that you can hear me just fine. Please mute yourself, although you do have the ability to unmute yourself if you would like to pause and ask a question. Turn off your video because we are recording this. And then click the chat box, which is that little circle icon with a little, I don't know, point on it and 2 lines. That is where we will be doing the bulk of our communicating today. And then just double check that you have your cell phones put away and microphones turned on so that way you can hear me okay, so I have your best attention for today. So just real quick, brief introductions. My name is Linda Burrows, for those of you that don't know me and haven't taken a webinar with me before, and I am the K-12 Social Studies and World and Native Languages Specialist here at the Arizona Department of Education. I've taught public school for about 20 years, all grades from 7 through 12, and all different levels from honors to dual enrollment to AP to co-taught classes. And if you can for a minute in the chat, please briefly introduce yourself by typing your first and last name. This does help me with a redundancy for attendance purposes. State your current position and where you teach, because I like to see where all over the state we are from. And while you guys are introducing yourselves in the chat, let's see, just so you know, you will be receiving a copy of this presentation with all of the hyperlinks in it, usually within a couple of days. Wait until you get an email from me. That email from me that says your attendance is complete is the cue that you can go back into the system and then print out your certificate for your attendance. Prior to that, it will mark you as unattended or you weren't here, but it just, you have to wait until you get that email from me and then you'll be good to go. So thank you guys all for coming. It looks like we've got people from the Valley and some charter schools, 6th grade teachers, elementary teacher from Sunnyside, Flagstaff. Thank you so much for coming. Let's see, we've got Casa Grande. Wonderful. Sholo, I bet it's nice and cool up there for you in Apache Junction. This is great. Red Rock, wonderful. Oh, we've got people from all over. Oh, wonderful. 1st grade from Clarkdale Jerome, some of my favorite places to go visit. Fantastic. Well, thank you all so much for coming today. So let's go ahead and get started. So today we're going to be looking at and examining what our assessments just used for. Why do we even bother with it, right? Why we should use inquiry when we think about our assessments, and then really examine what an inquiry-based assessment looks like. And then I really want to get into how to develop them. There are a bunch of ready-to-use ones out there, but it's nice to be able to kind of see and identify and use some yourselves. And then lastly, just leave you with a few inquiry-based assessment resources. And I've got some research articles for all different subject matters, because I know not all of us here just teach social studies. So first off, I want to look at what our assessments used for. So I've created a little Jamboard here, and I'm going to go ahead and open that up, and then I'll type the link into the chat for you. And I just want to get your idea of what you guys think assessments are used for. So let's go ahead and do that. You can either click on that link directly. If it doesn't work, then try copying and pasting the link into a browser. If you are unfamiliar with Jamboard, it's a really great free way to interact with people virtually. On the left here is your toolbar. What I'd like for you to do is just go ahead and click on this 4th one down. It's actually a sticky note, and you can pull that up. You can change colors, all different things, to see what my students have learned. Right? And then you just click save, cancel out of that, and it brings up a regular sticky note, and then you can just drag and drop it all over the place. So what I'd like to see is kind of guessing what, looking at what you guys use assessments for. And again, perfect, thank you. If it doesn't work for you, then feel free to type your information into the chat. Definitely determining mastery is one of the reasons. Progress evaluation, another good one. Measuring student understanding. Oh, I like that. Everybody comes in as random animals, so whoever was I didn't see, that's great. So when the chef tastes the soup and when the guest tastes the soup. Perfect. Wonderful. Checks for understanding, very crucial. Progress monitoring, sometimes we have to do it. The districts want to have certain benchmarks to measure different schools by within the system. Oh, there you go, district data that they can use to evaluate effectiveness. Yep, but really measuring student mastery, perfect. Check for understanding, mastery of a skill, wonderful. Let's see, we'll just give it a couple more minutes. Perfect. Go ahead, if you just joined, if you could turn off your camera because we are recording this session today. There we go. All right, any other last thoughts on what assessments are used for? Okay, perfect. So it definitely looks like everybody's kind of on the same page. We really want to test and see the skills that our students are learning. We want to see where they're at with regards to mastery and how our students are doing that. All right, so everyone should still see my screen again. Okay, let's move on. Let's see, so why we use mastery or why use inquiry assessments? So this comes mostly from an article that I got off the Library of Congress from their teacher program, but I thought it's really great as to why inquiry assessments are sometimes better used than other assessments. And they make the argument that multiple choice assessments are not necessarily the greatest means to determine mastery of our students, right? Sometimes students get the right answer for the wrong reason. They're lucky guessers. And sometimes they get the wrong answer for the right reasons, right? Their thinking and the way they're going through that process is correct, but they just came up with that wrong reason. Wrong answer. Also, sometimes multiple choice answers can be difficult to measure true learning of our students, right? Because of those reasons. We also sometimes don't know how our students are thinking with regards to our multiple choice assessments. DBQs are great, and they're great ways to do inquiry and do assessments with students, but doing like a full-fledged inquiry can take multiple days and can take a lot of time to grade. And so that's one of their big downfalls to doing it. So this is where we come up with our next one of just using really quick, and this is what I'm focusing on today, really quick inquiry-based assessments. And so the ones that I'm going to be showing you and focusing on today, the idea is that you have a very clear purpose to start out with, right? What exactly do we want our students to be, to look and to assess? We want to have very clear expectations so the kids know what they're being asked to do. And this is nice too, that we're assessing just very specific skills and dispositions or very specific content. So this is not something that you can use to, do like a big giant summative assessment. Well, while you can adapt it and do more of like a DBQ kind of way to do it, we're really focusing in on something very granular. We want to look at just one skill or one piece of content to see, okay, have our students reached where we want them to be? And the nice thing about doing it and really getting that small granular level is that they're very quick to grade. And so that is always, I think, something that when you're not spending, which I've done, an entire Saturday, grading essays all day to see about how my kids are doing, this is one thing that's kind of nice. So the ones that I'm going to focus on come from the Stanford History Education Group, or SHEG, if you're familiar with that. They are geared more towards, if you go and get them online, they are geared more towards middle and high school, but they are fantastic to be this process, which I think is very easily adapted for our K to 5 kids. And there's no reason why you can't do an assessment like this with younger students. So that's something yes, I had plenty of days sitting out on my patio grading all day essays, especially when I was teaching like AP World, where you're doing constant essays. So, all right, so here's a little intro video on what the Stanford History Education Group, and we're going to take this and kind of tweak it and modify it, but this is the basis of what we're doing. And this is just a short little 2-minute video that I'm going to play for you here.
Imagine if real-life decisions were like a multiple choice exam.
First question. To surprise the British troops in Trenton, should I A. dress my troops up as a marching band and offer to play a free concert? B. Hide my troops in a giant horse and present it as a victory gift to the British? C. Cross the icy Delaware in a rickety rowboat? D. Stay in my tent because it's cold outside and let someone else deal with them?
Seems ridiculous, right? Essentially, that's what multiple choice tests do. They penalize kids for not knowing facts that are ripped out of context. On the opposite end of the spectrum are document-based questions requiring students to analyze and write a college-level essay based on 10 documents. But what if your students haven't learned to analyze one document, let alone 10? As an educator, do you have any other options? Now you do. Beyond the Bubble was developed by the Stanford History Education Group and unlocks the vast digital archive of the Library of Congress to create a new generation of history assessments. Our easy-to-use assessments capture students' knowledge in action rather than their recall of disconnected facts. We call our exercises History Assessments of Thinking, or HATS. HATS asks students to engage in historical reasoning as they critically examine primary sources. Most HATS take just a few minutes to complete and are easy to score. They also come with interactive scoring rubrics, samples of student work, and going deeper videos that extend your understanding of these assessments. Your students' short written responses to these HATS will give you access to what they are really thinking. Of course, there's always the alternative.
Are you sure we weren't supposed to dress up as a marching band? No, I picked A last time. It has to be C.
I'd have preferred D. I'm freezing. I think I got some ice in my knickers.
Everyone be quiet. I picked C, and that's the answer.
There we go. So that just gives you a little introduction of where the Stanford History Education Group is coming from. And it is this idea, and I think especially given everything that has happened over the last year, this was one of the conversations that we had in the work group last week, is that a lot of our students were not asked to do a lot of thinking over the past year and a half. And so the idea of doing big, giant DBQs is a little overwhelming at this point. And so this kind of fills a real niche that we have now, as well as making it easier. Plus, again, like I said, trying to write a multiple choice question test is not, they're really difficult actually to create. So here's the one that I'm going to show you as an example. We're going to walk through it. And then what we're going to do is actually then deconstruct this and see how can we make one ourselves, which is really the key to this. So this is one that I took off of the Stanford History Education Group's website. You can absolutely do anything on there. It's free, sign up for an account. And even if you don't teach 6th through 12th grade, I still recommend going out there and doing it because they have lots of great ideas of things that you can adapt and modify for younger grades. So this is one called The First Thanksgiving. And so I'm actually going to have you guys do this here. And we're going to do this on the second page of the Jamboard. So this is a piece of art titled The First Thanksgiving, 1621. It's by J.L.G. Ferris, and it was painted in 1932. And my question for you is, the painting, The First Thanksgiving, 1621, helps historians understand the relationship between the Wampanoag Indians and the Pilgrim settlers in 1621. Do you agree or disagree? Briefly support your answer. So here is the Jamboard. I'm going to pull this up again. And then once we get out there, for those of you that are still on it, let's see. Oops. Let me go ahead and mute everybody here. What you're going to do is you're going to want to come up here to this section where it's got this rectangle and it's got 1/2, arrow over, and that will take you to our first Thanksgiving. And so this is, again, you just kind of on a sticky note. Here's our question. The painting, The First Thanksgiving, 1621, helps historians understand, sorry, I guess I got really excited typing understand, the relationship between the Wampanoag Indians and Pilgrim settlers in 1621. Do you agree or disagree? Briefly support your answer. So I'll give you a minute to go ahead and answer that. And if you can't get into the Jamboard, feel free to type your answer into the chat as well, please. One thing while I'm waiting for you guys to kind of do this yourselves. The nice thing too, especially for those of you that do teach maybe in a dual language immersion classroom, or if you have an ELL student in middle school, a lot of these come in Spanish already. And so that's one thing that's kind of nice as a resource to have. Okay, we're getting some great answers here. Perfect. So I'll just kind of start while we're finishing up here, reading the ones in the chat. Disagree. This is an artist interpretation. Art is meant to inspire or entertain. It's not a reliable source of information. Good. Certain perspective, which is, years beyond the event. Sure, why not? It's a picture most of our history books paint. Absolutely. Subject to artist interpretation. If the painting is factual interpretation, it's a big if. Exactly. And so the ones on the Jamboard strongly disagree. The painting shows only the artist's interpretation, doesn't show the attitudes of the present. The painting was created in 1932 and might not accurately depict an event that occurred in 1621. If it weren't for the Wampanoag help, the Pilgrims probably would not have survived, and this is a valid statement due to their cooperation. Perfect. I think it helps understand some of the cultural elements, but doesn't clearly show the dynamics. Disagree, fictional view of the event, and done after the event. Strongly disagree, whitewashed version. If it weren't for the Wampanoag tribe, many of the settlers would not have survived. Perfect. Yep, definitely the painting is from the painter's point of view. So you saw how quick it was, and you can see how with your students, right, looking at this image, this is maybe the image that they've, like someone said in the chat, right? This is the image that's been portrayed of Thanksgiving, and that's not really what has happened. And so I just want to take this is hyperlinked. So when you get this PDF when I do your attendance, this will take you straight out here to this exact historical thinking assessment. And so it shows you here, it's got the picture, but what's nice here, you've got all of these downloaded materials for you, which are completely free. And I've used these many, many times in my classroom. They are really extraordinary and well done. But what you've got is you've got it both in English and in Spanish. They give you a rubric already. They give you the actual link to go find this in the Library of Congress. And then they've given you a template here for creating your own, as well as tracking student sample responses, all that kind of stuff. And then here they've actually got a little explanation of what happens, which we're going to just do this again for my next little video. So this is the rubric that they have on here. So this is one of the things that I like about doing these rubrics and doing more inquiry-based assessments. And this kind of stems from starting to teach AP way back in the day. It's asset-based, and that's what's nice rather than a multiple choice test, which is more, negative-based. Asset-based is either the student has it or they don't. You don't punish kids for getting the wrong answer or making a wrong guess. It's either they make that, they're able to make that and have that mastery, or they don't. And if they don't, then that allows you as a teacher to go back and reteach some of those vital things that maybe the students missed the first time or didn't quite understand. So this was their example of their rubric for this one, that if a student answered this, they were considered proficient, where a student explains why the time gap limits the reliability of the source as evidence and what happened at that first Thanksgiving. Emergent would be the student evaluates the reliability of the source but does not fully explain the problems caused by the gap in time. And basic is the student just doesn't recognize the gap in time and instead takes the painting at face value or provides an irrelevant response. So you can see from this rubric, the skill that we were looking at in doing this task or this inquiry assessment was sourcing, right? We just want to see, can kids understand that sourcing has bias, that time matters, looking at the difference between a primary and secondary source, right? So all of that comes with this. So moving on, here's just a real quick, and again, this is just a couple minutes to have them explain it definitely more articulately than I just did about this assessment that we just did together.
Thanksgiving is part of our national heritage. Although it did not become a holiday until after the Civil War, Thanksgiving has become mired in myth and legend. William Bradford's travelogue from the 1600s provides us with many of the details of a festive meal between the Wampanoag Indians and the Pilgrims. But other than Bradford's account, a single source written long after the supposed meal, what can we really say about the origins of our national feast? Even though the origins of Thanksgiving may be in doubt, how historians make sense of the past is not. Using a practice commonly referred to as sourcing the document, historians look first to the document's source information to gain insight into when it was produced, by whom, and for what purpose. This assessment measures students' ability to source. Students have to consider whether an image painted in 1932 is useful to historians in reconstructing what happened 300 years before. To answer this question, students need to pay attention to the gap between when this painting was completed and the event the painting depicts. Many students ignore the source information altogether. Instead, they engage in matching. Students who have an image in their minds of pilgrims and Indians getting along jovially look at the image and conclude that it's useful to historians. As one student wrote, "You can see how they are interacting with each other. Without any picture, you couldn't really see how Wampanoag Indians and the Pilgrims interacted with each other." What about students who bring background knowledge to this image? Consider this student's response. As soon as the settlers arrived, there was mass curiosity which turned into violence and hatred. There was never such a party between the two peoples. They couldn't even understand each other. At first glance, this student has done something good, accessing and using prior knowledge. Yet, like the previous student, this student only considers whether the source fits a particular image of Thanksgiving. In both cases, students have disregarded something fundamental to the evaluation of historical evidence: when the painting was completed. Students who understand sourcing understand the problems with using a depiction made 300 years after the fact. One student wrote, "This painting was drawn 311 years after the actual event happened. There is no evidence of historical accuracy, as we do not know if the artist did research before painting this, or if he just drew what is a stereotypical Pilgrim and Indian painting." This assessment takes only a few minutes to complete, but in those few minutes, we gain rich insight into students' understanding of sourcing, a cornerstone of historical thinking.
Perfect. So with SHAG, they definitely focus on historical thinking, but I argue that using this template that we're going to go through next really can be applied to any of the social studies disciplines, and honestly, really any discipline going forward. You can use it for economics, you can use it for civics, you can use it for geography. It's really just picking the one skill or content area that you want to look at, creating a question, and then having the kids answer it. So going forward, this is essentially creating, how to create these assessments and what you need to do to start with. And this is the process to begin with. It's first starting with, what do we want to measure? What is the skill we're looking at? What unit does this fit into? Where in the class does this work? And what I like about this is you can really use these very easily as a pre and a post kind of test in that way. So you can see, say if we take, for example, the idea of, say, sourcing, and at the beginning of the year, the students haven't done any practice with it, see where they are at the beginning and then do something, the exact same test, but maybe with a different primary source, see it at the end, and then see how they have progressed. So you figure out what you want to measure first, then find your resource. And that's one thing that I will say, while social studies doesn't have the glamour of STEM or CTE and some of these other kind of sexy subjects, we do have tons and tons of free resources for all grade levels that we can access digitally, and you can download them, you can print them off. A lot of them are open education resources that you can use and just cut up excerpts of them. So that is one thing, that there are tons of resources out there to find. The next is crafting the question. And then after we craft the question that really kind of does get to that point of what do you want the kids to prove that they know or don't know, then double check kind of that question, stress test it, and revise it. So we're going to go through kind of each of these steps. So first, starting off with what to measure. So think about, what is that skill? What is the one thing that you want your students to learn? And a great place is to look at the standards. So if we come out here, and I'm going to just kind of pull up, I have this all hyperlinked out to our Arizona standards. So here we go. If you come out here and you look at the standards, and I'll put this in the chat as well, so that way you guys just have that as a quick link for you. You can come and look at the whole document. You can do by grade band, or what I think is really effective, especially if you teach K through 8, is come out here and find just your grade that you teach. So we have a bunch of 6th grade teachers here, so I'm going to pull up 6th grade. And I find this is probably the easiest thing to do, is to come here and figure out, okay, what exactly is the standard? Because these are written, one, they're part of the overall anchor standards that we want kids to master by the time they graduate high school. But this is written at a really nice grade specific, grade appropriate level for your students. So in this case, if we take and continue with sourcing, right, if you look here let me highlight the correct one. Oh, let's see. Here we go. 6 SP 2.1 is explain how and why perspectives of peoples have changed throughout different historical eras. So just looking at that and understanding bias with regards to, this particular primary source would hit that standard quite well. And if we go back and look at actually all of our standards, I just am pulling up my notes here. So that exact standard, looking at sourcing, comes in kindergarten at grade is KSP 2.1, and it says, with prompting and support, compare diverse cultures using primary sources such as photographs, artifacts, music, secondary sources, fiction, and nonfiction. So again, you could use that exact same inquiry and just maybe modify what your expectations are, right? And that would be a perfect example of that standard. Sourcing is in 1st grade, where we say compare diverse cultures using primary sources such as photographs, artifacts, etc. It's in 2nd grade, comparing diverse cultures from around the world using primary sources such as photographs, artifacts. It's in third grade, explaining why individuals and groups have different points of view on the same event. Fourth grade, explaining why individuals and groups during the same historical period differed in their perspectives on issues and events. Fifth grade, again, explaining why individuals and groups during the same historical period differed in their perspectives. Sixth grade has that same exact wording. Seventh and eighth grade and high school all say explain how and why perspectives of people have changed over time. Also analyze how people's perspective influence what information is available in the historical sources they created. So just using that idea of sourcing and bias and getting our kids to understand it, it's such an important skill, which is fantastic, especially in today's day and age, where students really need to understand what is true and what is false when they are bombarded with information in all different kinds of places, like from TikTok to Instagram, all of that, and teaching them that media literacy, but that does go with sourcing too, which is straight out of our standards. So that's kind of the first thing that we really want to look at, and the standards are the perfect place to go and use your guide. You also, if you don't want to focus on a skill like the disciplinary skills and processes, you can look at your content standards as well and think, what do you want to make sure your students have a strong understanding of? So maybe you want to look at something with civics or, like especially in the K2 grade band, right? Looking at holidays and things like that as part of the standards as well. And in the course considerations or the storylines and that bulleted list up at the top, those are perfect things that you can also do a small inquiry-based assignment like this. So that's kind of the first step, is just figuring out, okay, what do we want to really see where our students are with this? Here are just some of the basic ones that come from our standards when we just look at skills. I didn't go through and do all of the content because it just would have been way too much. But these are really the skills that we are asked to make sure that our students master by the time they graduate high school. So they do need to know sourcing. They also need to know chronological reasoning, which in a younger grades, this would be what came first, what came second, what came third, and why. Comparison. We have multiple perspectives, right? How do the Wampanoag Indians, how would they view the first Thanksgiving? How would the Pilgrim settlers view that? Claim, evidence, and reasoning are part of our sourcing, as well as cause and effect, corroboration, periodization, contextualization, and then, of course, like that background knowledge. And that's where I put all of the content area, which, again, when you look at your standards, let me pull them back up so that way we can see. When you look at your standards, if you're not familiar with this kind of platform, these are part of the standards up here. And so this is your bulleted list or your course considerations. This is the bulk, the meat of your content or topics that you would want to teach for your specific grade level. So going on with that, and we have our what we want to teach, then we're going to get to finding our resources. So if we come back here, maybe, and let's just use this as an example. In sixth grade, maybe we want to now instead, let's just say we want to, let's see, classify a series of historical events. So maybe we'll want to do this kind of chronological reasoning in this skill. So keep that in mind, because I'm going to give you some time to go look at and see if you can find a couple of ideas to do that. So let's do chronological reasoning. So this is where we want to go. And so one, I just typed a couple of resources out here. There are tons to do this, and I will show you. Actually, let me pull up the internet back again. Show you here. If we look at our standards page for ADE, again, in case you didn't know this here, if we come out here to the social studies, click on this resources link here, and here we've got a ton of resources based on high school, depending upon the subject that you teach, and K-8, here's another list. So if we look at sixth grade again, here are your course considerations, and then we've got a bunch of lists here that have all sorts of places where you can go to find free, or maybe they're pretty much always free. It is a little dated. Teaching Tolerance is Now Learning for Justice, so this is a couple of years old, but there are great things out here. But today I'm just going to focus on things from the Library of Congress. And so I've highlighted these in the past, but again, just to show you where to go. And I'm going to open these up and we're just going to look at each one of these, because I find this is the toughest place and toughest thing for teachers that are maybe not used to doing inquiry assessments like this, is, well, where do I go and how do I find one, one particular one? So this is the first one. And again, I'm just going to copy and paste these. So that way, as I'm talking, please feel free to go out and start searching for something that you think might work with chronological reasoning. Or if you have an idea that, hey, I could use this, in my unit next week, have at it, go find something. So these are classroom materials, primary source sets that are already curated by master teachers through the Library of Congress. And they have all different ones, like here's one on Arizona if you teach 3rd grade. They've got all different kinds of state ones. Here's Alexander Hamilton. Here's one of Abraham Lincoln. Maybe you're going to talk about, here's 19th century writers. So if you just come out here and look, it's got all sorts of different primary source sets out here. So you've got a book or something handwritten, a note. You've got images. You've got obviously like broadsheets and all sorts of different things. And all of these are music even, which are fantastic to go out here and look at. So that's one place to go. Next one, and this is great, called Chronicling America. Let me copy and paste this into the chat for you. And again, you'll get all of these links as well when I send out the PDF of this. But this is fantastic that you can go out here and you can search all states. So say if you want to search Arizona and you want to come here and say, okay, what was going on in Arizona? Oops. At say like the turn of the century, maybe because that's where you're focused on, or maybe you're reading a book that's about that time period. So you can come out here and maybe just do, let's have a little bit of a wider window. We'll say before World War I starts. You can click go. And what's nice and what I like about this, and sorry, my internet's not coming in super fast, but you can find it for all the different counties. Like, so here's the Mojave County Minor. So you can get, if you teach in Mojave County, you can get articles from Mojave County. I mean, you can see we've got 160,000 sources. So you can narrow your search by adding in some type of thing. Let's do, oh, I don't know. Here, let's do statehood and see if that narrows it. So now we've narrowed it down to, only 14,000 episodes, or options. But you can come out here and just take the time. What's nice about the Library of Congress, my internet's not working well, I apologize. But you can see, you can zoom in and zoom out. You can link to this if you have to have kiddos that are home due to COVID or they're sick, right? They can look at these online that way. And again, wanting to excerpt things. Don't do an entire newspaper article for one of these. Maybe you just want to pick one thing of what came first and then pick a second one that's really short and say, okay, why did one thing, this item come first and why did this come second, and give their reasoning behind it. They have this crop item here, which is fantastic, that you can go out and actually just crop a piece of it, cut it, paste it into like a Word document, save it as a PDF, print it out, whatever you need to use it for. And I think that's another great resource for it. This one I like a lot too. This is what I just recently found out about. It's called the Free to Use and Reuse, which I mentioned this, I think, in inquiry number 2. But I love this because these are all different kinds of really neat curated pictures and images. Again, all open source. Depending, maybe you're going to read a book about tennis, or your book has something talking about discovery and exploration, the cherry, I mean, just there are tons and tons of things out here to come out here and look. And so here we go, Japanese fine prints. Here we have all these different neat images. Here, American steamship with a group of passengers. I mean, the kind of questions that you can, see what the kids can look at and do. So that's another one. And then this is the next one I wanted to show you, which is primary source Nexus, which has fantastic sources that, again, because there's no reason, even though SHEG does focus these on middle and high school, there's no reason you can't adapt this and do this in our elementary schools. And so it's got all sorts of kindergarten, first grade. Here we go, exploring cultural rituals. where you can come out here and it has, let's see, here we go, all sorts of sources where you can look at like your wedding pictures, different things like that. And so what you can just do is take the actual image. You don't have to do the whole lesson, but it's a way to come out here and search for those. Let's see here. Let me put that one into the chat for you. And then this is another great one, teachinghistory.org. And I like this because it does have, as well as high school, it's got middle school and elementary lessons as well, or primary sources too. So this is, again, these would be kind of some of my first ones to go to. So if you want to look for elementary school, here we have K2 resources, 3.5. Here you've got some more historical thinking and literacy out here. Here's one actually on the Pilgrims in American culture and Thanksgiving. I know obviously that just happened, so, but you know, save up for, think of it for next year. So there's a lot of different neat things there that you can look at and go to. If we look at our middle school, again, thinking of you know, chronological reasoning that we want to check, like here's a great one. Looking at the civil rights era, right? That could be later, like second semester, conservation movement going green, you know, and just ask them to pick, okay, well, which picture comes first and why, and have them look at that. Or you could just, again, use just an excerpt, cut out just like 50 or 100 words. Don't go crazy with a whole bunch and just make it really kind of short and sweet. Again, narrowing in on that one skill or that one piece of content that you want your students to look at. And then lastly, here's Shag, which is, you know, one of my all-time faves. But here, so they've got reading like a historian, which are other kinds of lessons, a little bit more involved, like a DBQ. But here are the Beyond the Bubble. And then they also, I have to put a shout out, if you teach middle school or high school, the Civic Online Reasoning are fantastic lessons. And it gives a lot of neat things to do and does a lot of stuff that can hit those media literacy standards. But here's the Beyond the Bubble history assessments. So it focuses again on US and world, so that'd be great for 6th and 7th grade. Some of the stuff could be used by 8th grade as well. I like it too that you can come in here and you can actually test, narrow it down based upon the skill that you want to search for, which is great. And again, if you don't teach middle or high school, come out here and look at these and then take them and copy them and just, you know, tweak them a little bit, right? So like the US history ones, you could tweak and maybe do a different image or maybe just modify the task a little bit and use it for 5th grade. Or the world history ones you could use for like a 4th grade or 3rd grade, because we have to cover the Americas in 4th grade. And so that could be part of that too, you know, like talking about slavery in 4th grade, different options and ideas to use for that. So don't be afraid to take these, again, because they are open education resources. Use them, modify them to fit your needs, and it's a great, great place to go. So here is the main Stanford page if you're unfamiliar with it. There you go. And again, all of this is free. So that's what we want to do, right? We want to go out, find a resource, see what works, and then craft the question. This I find is kind of the toughest thing for me when I'm thinking of a compelling question. If I'm doing a full inquiry design model like we've talked about in the past, or even just honestly coming up with multiple choice questions or stimulus-based multiple choice questions. The questions for me personally, it's the hardest thing because I want it to be good, and that's the tough thing. So this is some tips that I have. One, using your resource. Have it in front of you. Look at it, read it, go over it. And again, it doesn't have to be an image. It can be a song. It can be an oral story, right? The Korean Foundation has put tons of oral histories of Korean War vets out there. Take an excerpt, just, you know, a minute or 2 minutes of an oral story and see what it is. I mean, today's Pearl Harbor Day. You know, see and find an oral story of a vet from World War II. They're all out there. And so then just craft one or more questions about the source that reflect and measure the skill you want to address. Again, the questions can be really simple. What came first and what came second? Or the questions can be more complicated. So it really depends where on the path your students are that you want to test that mastery for. If they've been doing and practicing sourcing, then you know what, make the question more complicated. If this is the first time you've done it, make it really simple. Hey, is this a valid source? Yes or no? Do you agree or not agree? Right? That's what that first Thanksgiving one was. It would be a great introduction to that idea. So then you want to kind of double check the question. And so again, take the time to consider what you are asking your students to accomplish. What is that skill that you want to make sure that they are mastering, or that, you know, they're just starting to learn? And then ask yourself, is that task really focused on the skill or the content, or are you asking something way off? Because inevitably, if you're anything like me, you're like, oh, I've got this great primary source and I've got this question, and then I'm looking at it and I'm like, oh my God, I'm not even asking what I really want them to be asking. I've kind of gone off on this tangent, or my own personal excitement or passion kind of got in the way of something. So just keep that in mind. And again, does the source fit the task? Many times you might find, oh, you know what, the source really isn't good, and you may have to kind of go back and find a different source. And don't worry, that happens to all of us, and there's no problem. That's why you want to really take the time to double check and say, okay, is this really good? This would be a great thing, like if you do meet in a PLC, or maybe if you meet as grade level, you know, that you do the work on your own, and then bring this to your PLC or bring this to your grade level meeting, right? And say, okay, what do you guys think about this? I've got the source, I've got the question, do these two match? Here we go. And so that would be a great thing to do in one of those settings. And then once you've decided that yes, the source matches the skill and it matches the question, then you're going on to stress test it. And this is where you have to put on your student hats, right? And really, one, you can stress test it yourself, or you can just, you know, hey, you know what, we're going to do this and see if it works. How many times have we all done that, where it's like, okay, I've got this great idea, I've got this thing, I put it together, it's great, and you have your kids try it, and then it's like, yeah, where I was thinking they were is not where they are. And that's okay. So that's what the stress testing it is. You can think about this with your, you know, in your PLC. You can also do it with your students depending upon time and how they are. And then it's one of those things like how many times in your planning book, right? You're like, okay, I did this one lesson and it totally bombed. And so you kind of flag it and star it. So next year when it comes back around, I'm going to do it a little bit differently. And so that's really what the stress testing is, right? It's that idea of just, you know, kind of thinking, are you on the same page as your students? Yes, and adjustments will always happen no matter what. I don't care if you are the world's greatest, most master teacher out there, you're not going to be on the same page as your kids at some point in time. So it's okay. And you know what? It's okay to have a lesson that bombs and fails. We all do it. And it's just like, all right, note to self, let's do this again. And again, don't feel bad if you need to do multiple drafts of it. And you also too could, depending upon things, you could also, if you have like two great sources and you're not sure which one would be best, if you teach middle or high school, you could maybe give one to first hour, give a different one to second hour, or you could do half the room gets this one source with that question and the other half of the room gets another source with that question. That's all part of like finding out and sifting through the data to see if that would work, and feel free to do that as well. Those are all great ones to think of too. So then revise, like I said, look at it and really reflect on the whole process where pieces left out. And this is where you can kind of go back to the standards, right? Are there standards that we really didn't hit upon this year that it's like, okay, you know what, maybe we need to really focus in our PLC or focus in my teaching on what I need to this standard, you know? And I will say I'm the first one to admit I did not do a good job. I know my last year of sourcing. I'm like, oh my God, I would talk about it and we would do DBQs and we would do, you know, some SHEG lessons and stuff, but I really didn't take the time to go through it. And it's like, okay, you know what, that's on me. I totally missed and didn't do a great job on that. And then also, just did the students understand what they were being asked to do? Did their answers reflect their learning? And, you know, what tweaks need to be made before I do the task again or do it, you know, do it better? And also, The more you start to develop these and use these, the better you'll get at making them, and the better your students will get too. And I had, for example, my last year of teaching, I had the most difficult class of my teaching year of 21 years of teaching. 7th grade world history class. Love them to death now, but they were my sweat hogs, in which I'm dating myself. But they could not do just a basic inquiry at the beginning of the year. But man, by the end of the year, boom, 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 they were able to do it. And seeing them do that, and also taking that kind of parent moment to be like, look at you guys doing this. As silly as it sounds, you could not do this back in August when you first stepped into my classroom, and look at what you're doing today. As silly as it sounds for a bunch of jaded, sophomores that think school stinks and, don't have a lot of options. It was a Title I school. They loved that. They totally would give each other kudos and props on it. It was the most hilarious thing, but take those little moments and really, really use them to your advantage with that. So now we get to developing a rubric. And I know I talked a little bit with a person last time about this, and he and I were really getting into how you can use rubrics to, one, make your life easier grading, but two, to really kind of assess where kids are, given the fact that, our kids did have an odd 18 months, and their learning is not maybe where we want it to be or would prefer it to be, and their skills are lacking. So with these kinds of inquiries, I really recommend using a holistic rubric rather than an analytic rubric. And what that basically means is a holistic is just looking at one thing. That's it. Just one skill, which really fits with the idea of doing this inquiry-based assessment. Just pick one skill. Try to, when you're creating your rubric, have 3 to 5 categories that students can fall into. I wouldn't say go any less than, fewer than 3, but don't do any more than 5. And you can label your categories as advanced, proficient, emerging. I took some from like the world language. World language teachers do this fantastic. If you have world language teachers in your middle or high school, ask them about proficiency-based grading, because their standards are all proficiency-based, which is very different from ours. So you could do with novice, you could do basic as a term, meets expectations, exceeds expectations. So there are all these different categories that you could do. But the idea is to really clearly state the differences between each category. So like I showed you that basic one before, students will know, hey, this is what proficient is. I was able to identify the sourcing and why this answers a question. This is a good source to use, or it's not a good source to use, and then I gave that answer. If I could identify that there's something going on here, then great, but I couldn't quite identify what the problem was with the source. Okay, then maybe you're at just that emerging, and then maybe just as a basic. Also, this is not some like behind the curtain Wizard of Oz kind of thing. Students should see the rubric. Now, if you are assessing them for the first time to see where they're at, then okay, maybe not let them know. But once they know what they're doing, then yeah, absolutely. Let students know, so that way they see, okay, this is where I'm falling on the rubric, and this is what I need to do to get to the next level up. And so from there, then you can assign grades, which we talked about last time. I just had one high school teacher with me last webinar, and so he and I were conversing about how do you do that, right? How do you take then this rubric and kind of assess grades? Because we all have to still do grades, as much as we would love to do more of that mastery learning and mastery grades. And there are movements to do it, but it's such a fundamental shift, and parents don't really correspond to that, right? And so that makes it hard. They still see, okay, an A is an A, a B, C kind of thing. And so you can kind of make just general, hey, all right, if you are, if you have that basic level of it, then great, do, maybe that's a 70, right? Because you're not, or, you meet the expectations, you're at a 70. If you're at a basic, maybe you're at a 65 or 60, something like that. So just keep that in mind, that you can then assign numbers to those proficiency standards. But again, let the kids know. it's not secret, right? We want them to master it. The only way they can get there is if they know what's being expected of them. So here are some resources, again, that I have found that have great ideas. And again, you'll get all these. Here's the Beyond the Bubble direct link to it. This is one that as I was doing the research for this webinar, I thought was really good. It's 15 assessments that don't suck, which has some great things to it. The next one here is, this is my new favorite one. I think I put it in my newsletter a while ago. But I've just kind of like come back to it, but it's got all these great things here. This is from Harvard's Graduate School of Education called Project Zero. And specifically, this is their thinking routine toolbox. And again, it's all open education resources. So these are all little like assessments that you could do with inquiry and primary sources. So again, think, pair, share, digging into different ideas, all of that. There's all sorts of neat ideas to spice things up. Oh, hey, I've been doing Venn diagrams too much. Let me come out here, and if I want to do a comparison, how am I going to do something different? Which is not necessarily, it's a different type of assessment, right? So this is my new favorite website. And then also Hawaii has some fantastic stuff through them called Inquiry Problem Solving. And so this is their site here, where I like, again, especially for like K-5 teachers, right? You're teaching math and you're teaching science and you're teaching ELA skills and social studies on top of all this other stuff. Here, I think this is great because it talks about how exploring solutions or asking questions, how that fits with science, math, inquiry arc, and design thinking, these are both more of the ELA ones. But it's fantastic as you scroll down here. They've got all different kinds of resources, features that you can do, frameworks that you can use when you're creating these assessments, and activities as well in different categories for you. So that's another place to go, which I just found has kind of that wealth of information. Then I've also included some articles for you. So this is the Teaching with Primary Sources article that I used from the Library of Congress. This is also great talking about inquiry in world languages. Again, world language, if you teach in a middle or high school, or if you teach DLA, right? Ask your world language teachers, because they are all about proficiency-based standards. And so learning, okay, what is a novice? What is a novice low, novice mid, novice high? Like, there are categories even within a novice language learner. Ask them how they do that and look at that. And I do have samples. If you want me, I can send you samples of those. You can just feel free to email me and I can get those to you to show you what a rubric would look like that elaborate. This is also one from Turk, an article on inquiry and science for those of you that teach elementary. Here's just another one on rubrics that I found, which was interesting. And then also Discovery Ed, which the Arizona Department of Education has paid for all Arizona schools to have access to Discovery Education resources for the next 3 years for free. So definitely use that while we've got it, right? So this is a link to their rubrics and some of their learning online with that. So that is there. Again, our professional development, I will be sending out a survey in January to really kind of hone again what survey and what tools you guys need as teachers in the field to see what everybody is doing. So look for that, because right now we really don't have anything coming out too in depth. In the spring, we do have a civic conference and ACSS conference coming out. We've got some Everify trainings. And so if you use this QR code, that's where I put all of the trainings from our partner teachers and things like that. And it's constantly getting updated, which is nice. I do put it in my newsletter once a month, but it is out there that you can look if you need to get something, recertification hours, a lot of places to go for that. And then again, our website, if you haven't seen it, take a chance to go out there, the archived newsletters. If you don't get my newsletter, I highly recommend it. You can just send me, if you want to type your email in when I do the last bit of attendance, include that, then I'll add you to our distribution list, and that goes out once a month from August through May. But they are archived, so you can go out and look at all of the old ones, which is kind of nice. In fact, I think I just really, oh no, I did put December's out there. So here's December's. So again, you've got all these trainings in December, and you can see a bunch of our partners coming out for January, February, tips, surveys, conferences coming, These are great to apply for to get away for the summer for teachers. I've done many of them myself, and some of the best professional development I've done. Look for our, if you teach 3rd through 5th grade, look for our Four Corners one that's coming up in January, to apply for grants, an essay contest. Everfi's got some new resources. So this is what my newsletter looks like. So if you don't get it, let me know. You can just type your email into the chat and I will add you for next month. And then with that, our time is up, perfect on time. So please type your first and last name into the chat. If you want your newsletter, include your email address. If you don't already get it, if you already get it, you don't need to do that. Again, you need to wait until you hear from me. Your attendance will mark as unattended until I go in and change it. And I usually try to do that within a couple of days, but I will be sending you an email. When you get that email from me, that's your key that your attendance is marked complete. You'll get a PDF of this presentation with all of the resources and the hyperlinks. And with that, I just want to say thank you all very much for coming today. And please feel free to email me if you have any questions. My email is there. You got it when I emailed you this morning at linda.burrows@azed.gov. And again, my job is to teach teachers. If you have a hard time coming up with resources or finding something and getting started, if you have questions, I'm also available to come out and do virtual trainings. If your school wants to, say they have a PLC time or you've got a half day, we can do that. I've done it for Mojave County high schools. I've gone down to Tucson. I've done trainings in Yuma and in Flagstaff. So it's nice that I could do all this virtually and you guys could sit in a room and discuss and we could do work together. So that's a possibility too. So have a fantastic evening. I'm going to go ahead and end the recording now. And if anyone has any questions,